Hello again. I'm a moderator for the Stakeholder panel, and I've got the absolute pleasure of introducing to you two wonderful people who've done an incredible amount for child welfare in the state of Washington. The first person I'd like to introduce is Ron Murphy, Casey Family Programs Senior Director. The other person I'd love to introduce is Mary Helen Roberts, House of Representatives, 21st Legislative District of Snohomish County, and welcome and thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, we're going to get kind of right into it, and the first question I'd like to ask each of you is, why is this issue so important?
From my standpoint, the youth panel really talked about a number of issues that impacted them as a result of parents being incarcerated. I mean, they really did a great job of articulating the complex issues and the trauma that really they have experienced. My work in child welfare here in the state of Washington primarily is focused around those youth who are in the formal child welfare system. They've gone through dependency court, etc. and all. But I'm actually really amazed at the parallel of the data that was covered earlier and then what the youth have talked about, and the other research that, such as research by our organization, that talks about the post-traumatic type stress disorders that these youth who are in care experience, and as the data was shown earlier, it's even for those children who have not been in formal foster care and all. They still have a huge impact, and as you said at one point, these youth are our future. They're actually our present. And so the importance of really working with children and youth who are impacted by these issues, I think is it's urgent because as these youth transition into adolescence and then into adulthood, if some of the issues that have impacted them aren't remedied, then we know that for some they're unfortunately doomed to repeat some of the same kinds of things that they've experienced as a result of their trauma. So for me, it's important because these are people who need our attention, they need our support, and they need all of the best that this society can provide to them without judgment. That's why it's important. I mean, of course, we can look at the data and we can look at a lot of other kinds of reasons why too and all. But for me personally, I think that this is important to really provide the kinds of support and services to these children, youth, and their parents that they really need.
So same question to you, Mary Helen. Why is this issue so important to you?
Well, I approach this issue basically from two levels. One is having been a parent or being a parent, and just how important I think programs are that address the needs of children. And this is obviously a population that has some significant challenges. But I also have to come at this from a public policy perspective, from the position of being a legislator. And I guess I start with just looking at what are the costs of this. There are costs to the children in terms of their emotional well-being. There are costs to the state in terms of providing services and attempting to meet their needs. I really think this is a very foundational issue that ripples out at other things, including, what are our goals when we incarcerate someone? And what are the consequences when we incarcerate someone? I mean, what we have done here in Washington by passing legislation, having groups that look at the data, do research and find more data, is to put a population on the map that in the past we have just totally ignored. And I think the youth panel was quite remarkable in terms of getting at the points that we find out are the result of this. It means that we need to look at what we're doing and why we're doing it, that we need to make sure foster parents understand how important it is for a child to maintain some kind of connection with their parent. And there are parents who have made mistakes. There are parents who have drug or alcohol or mental illness problems that lead to their incarceration. But that's not a responsibility of the child's. These are kids that need a parent, that want a parent, and there are very few occasions when keeping some kind of connection isn't appropriate. So today we're talking to social workers, but I also get involved in talking to the Department of Corrections. And then I'm full of my commercial message that, all of us have to be talking to other legislators to say, are we doing the right things with our various institutions to do the best thing we possibly can for all children, and particularly children such as these who need more of us as a state.
Okay, so if you're, well, on one point I just would like to make a comment and a question to you, and that is, often drug addiction and nonviolent offenses are often looked at as criminal activity. Mm-hmm. And so do you take a different view of that? I mean, often people are saying, well, part of the reason we've got such high incarceration rates is because we're not looking at addiction as a health issue as opposed to a criminal issue, and so forth, et cetera. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I mean, I take a very strong position on this, and I do think that our drug laws and our war on drug has been an incredible error in policy, and that if we were much more focused on the research and much more focused on different approaches that are taken in different countries, that we would be shifting to looking at this as a public health issue and treating it that way, something that needs treatment. That you could say it's a crime to get tuberculosis too, and here these people keep relapsing, and what are we going to do about this? But this is just a different kind, I think, and it also is also a reflection of some of the other inequalities or problems in our society, that we don't have enough mental health services. And also that often drugs are, although illegal, self-medication for mental health problems or self-medication to deal with a life of poverty or past abuse or neglect of the parents themselves.
So one last question here, and then I'm going to open this up for some questions from the audience, and that is, if you were to try to get in the mind of a social worker, what would you have them keep in mind and maybe do differently working with kids with an incarcerated parent?
For me, one of the major things I think that must happen is that social workers have to engage the entire family system. Oftentimes, as we saw by the data, the maternal side is engaged, not as often as more often than the paternal side. And so I think that social workers really need to bring in the full range of the family to help identify what are the solutions that are going to help best meet the needs of the child and the youth. So from my standpoint, I think that it's important for social workers to think about what's the best permanent fit, safe, permanent fit for the child that they are working with, and how can they arrive at that. And we know more and more. I've been in this career for about 35 years, and I've certainly seen the kinds of trends over time that suggest that as a social worker, I never did have all of the answers. I really did need to have other people, family members especially, engaged in the conversation to identify what the solutions were. So I think that that's one thing I would suggest. The other thing that I think is really important is, using the standard of your own child. Would you want your child, would you want your niece or nephew or grandchild or what have you to just be kind of pushed aside and not paid attention to and not be given the best that can be given to them under the circumstances that they're encountering? Would you want your brother or sister or your son or daughter to not have the best kinds of services that are available to them and all? And if the answer is, actually, I do want the best for them, then I think that you act accordingly in terms of your skills, your knowledge, and your practice, and then from your heart too. And that's what I really try to also engage around.
How about you, Mary Helen?
Well, it's hard not to repeat what's already been said, so I'm trying to think of something that's a little different. And I don't mean to stigmatize other people, but I think sometimes we have to make an effort to move beyond or forget some of the things that we've been taught or the assumptions that exist within our society, but to really take in what this research is all about, take in what we're learning about brain development throughout our lives, and then go to the core of what children need, just as Ron was saying, what would you want for your own child? But they really do need a great deal of empathy and understanding of their emotions. And I also think that children respond very positively when they know that someone is there for them. It's that that kind of, be the cheerleader, be the person that understands the situation, and then says, well, how are we going to make the best of this? I have a good friend that's a teacher, and she told me the story of talking with to a child in her class that was in a fairly terrible situation. And I think my response would have been sort of an, oh, that's just terrible. How are you dealing with this? And yet this teacher said, boy, you're really very good at getting yourself to school and dealing with the challenges in your life. And I think taking that kind of positive approach of, as one of the kids said, a message of hope. You're going to get through this. Mm-hmm. And we're going to do together what we can to make this come out okay for you and for the future of your life, and to the extent to which we can, for your parent.
Well, I got to tell you, as a solution-based coach, I appreciate a lot what you just said. How have you been able to manage through this? And they give us great information when we ask them that. Have you been able to function as well as you have in spite of what's going on? So thank you guys so much, and I really appreciate it. I know both of you are incredibly busy, but I think this is incredibly important, and I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Welcome back. This is part 2, an addendum to the Stakeholder panel. We're fortunate to have with us today Dr. Kathy Russell of Pacific Lutheran University. Dr. Russell has been an integral part of the effort to address the issues of children of the incarcerated in Washington State, and was a part of the Oversight Committee and the current Children and Families of Incarcerated Parents Statewide Advisory Committee, and has done some research on this issue as well. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Miriam.
And I wanted to first start with the question, why is this issue important?
An excellent question, and I'd like to say that I grasped immediately why it was important, but the real truth of the matter is that a student who was doing an internship at Washington Correction Center for Women asked a series of really excellent questions, and we got caught up in finding the answers. She wondered why, with 1,000 women, more or less, in the facility, why only the same 40 or 50 kids appeared to use most of the programs. And we began to try and explore how many children there might be. As we did that, we discovered that we don't really inquire. Sometimes really excellent law enforcement officials inquire at arrest. Sometimes people inquire at court. Sometimes people inquire of offenders when they enter the department, but there was no consistent way of keeping track of children of incarcerated parents. And so, as we began to explore, I became convinced that this is not just an issue about children, but it's about building strong families, strong communities, and strong children. And it's helping kids to grow up to be secure, wage-earning contributors in the communities where we all live. For me, this is a social justice issue, in part because of the disproportionate arrest rate for persons of color, but also because we know that children go to prison, if they have an incarcerated parent, at a rate higher than the rest of the population. And so if we're not careful, we perpetuate that disproportionality, and that seems wrong to me. It is an issue that affects not just those children, but it affects the communities in which they live. Donald Brayman, who has studied the inner city neighborhoods of Washington, D.C., suggests that in the $1 million neighborhoods where we are spending more than $1 million to incarcerate offenders from one single neighborhood, that is causing a shift in the roles of marriage, how people are socialized, what children grow up believing family is, and what is normal. And so we want to pay attention to how this issue affects every layer of our society. It's true that children with incarcerated parents tend to emerge as multi-needs children, in part because they lose a parent to incarceration, they lose that parent's care and their income. It often requires them to move, and that often means changing schools. It's a secret that separates them from their friends, causes social isolation, and can sometimes lead to school dropout or school behavior problems. Divorce can be a part of this for families. And so children acquire more risks, and we may see them in other populations besides just identifying them as children of incarcerated parents. Most importantly, this is important to me because children haven't done anything wrong. They're serving a silent sentence along with their offender parent. One of the most captivating stories I've heard about this, Nell Bernstein tells in her book, All Alone in the World, Children of Incarcerated Parents. And Bernstein picked up this story from a law enforcement journal in state government. And she tells in the story about how law enforcement officials stopped a mother driving with 2 children in the car because the younger child was not appropriately restrained in a car seat. And as they were pulling the mother over, they checked her license plates and registration, and they discovered that she had an outstanding warrant. And so the law enforcement officers appropriately took Mom away. She managed to convince them that they should leave the children some money to make a phone call, but they drove away with the mother and left the children in the car. And Bernstein points out that while the officers were technically correct in doing exactly what they should have done, how quickly that child became invisible, that child who was so important that when they made the traffic stop, that they pulled the mother over, but who was then so invisible that they were left in the car at the end. And so building strong communities and helping kids to be secure is why this is an important issue to me.
Thank you so much. Considering the enormity and the importance of this issue, what would you say social workers should keep in mind when working with families affected by parental incarceration?
I would say 3 things to social workers. I would say that it's important for us to remember that regardless of what the parent has done, the children still love the parent, and that their ability to maintain some kind of connection to the parent will have impact on their ability to form attachment and relationships later in life with other people important to them. A second thing I would say to social workers is that we need to remember that although we talk about all the risks children of incarcerated parents have, they're also enormously resilient, and that we need to focus on their strengths. I asked 1,411 offenders about their children, and I asked them about their children nearest the age of 18. And the 4 top answers were that 38% of them had seen alcohol or drug abuse in the home. 35% of them had received honors at school. 30% of them belonged to some club or group. And 23% of them had had a visit from CPS. And that, to me, says a lot about the multidimensional nature of these children. They face issues, they have enormous strengths, and it's only by focusing on their strengths that will help them to be empowered and to build a life for themselves. The last thing I would remind social workers of is that the Code of Ethics says that advocacy is not just a suggestion, it's a requirement for social work. And who better than social workers and social service providers who see children individually, who see families in groups, who see communities and neighborhoods, to point out what kinds of things we need to address when we deal with children with incarcerated parents. So I hope that we hear more and more from social workers about what's needed as we attempt to serve this group.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you for your presentation here, and thank you so much for your work on this important issue in the state.
Thanks, Miriam.
And that concludes the stakeholder panel.